They were told it was just another test, a flash brighter than the sun, a shockwave that would change history. But what came after, the glowing lights in the sky that refused to fade, was something no scientist could explain. In the silent deserts of Nevada, soldiers who once marched beneath the mushroom clouds began to whisper of ghostly orbs that drifted above the sands. Lights that shimmered like lost souls suspended in the night. Some said it was radiation. Others swore it was something else, something alive. These men had seen the unimaginable nuclear fire that turned night into day. Yet, what terrified them most weren't the explosions themselves, but what lingered long after the smoke cleared. Reports vanished, records were sealed, and the few who dared to speak about it disappeared into silence. This is not just the story of nuclear tests. It's the story of a haunting born from humanity's most dangerous experiment, a mystery that blurs the line between science and the supernatural. Tonight, we uncover what the soldiers saw, and what the government never wanted you to know. The desert of fire, the soldiers arrived before dawn, their boots crunching on the cold, cracked desert floor. The air was still too still, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Somewhere beyond the horizon, an atomic bomb waited to be born. They had been told it was safe far enough away to watch, close enough to learn. Most were barely 20 years old, faces hidden beneath helmets and goggles, clutching rifles that would mean nothing against what they were about to see. When the countdown began, silence spread like a fever. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then came the impossible. A flash brighter than the sun swallowed the desert whole. The world turned white. Shadows burned into the sand. And for one long, endless second, the soldiers swore they could see through their own hands. Then came the sound, a rolling, monstrous roar that shook the bones inside their chests. The shock wave hit, hurling dust, rock, and the smell of burnt air into their lungs. The heat bit their skin. Some men laughed, others cried. But when the fireball rose into the morning sky, blooming like a god's wrath, every voice fell silent. It was over quickly, or so they thought. That night, as the desert cooled, strange colors began to move in the distance. At first, they thought it was leftover fire, a reflection, maybe. But the lights didn't fade. They shimmered soft blues, greens, even pale gold floating low over the craters, gliding like living mist. One soldier swore he saw them pulsing, as if they were breathing. The officers dismissed it as radiation, just lingering ions reacting to the atmosphere. But the men knew better. The lights moved against the wind. They gathered near the blast sites, hovering in clusters like curious watchers. When the soldiers approached, the lights drifted away, silent, patient, almost intelligent. Private Ellis wrote in his pocket diary that night. They looked like souls that forgot how to die. In the days that followed, the desert grew stranger. At dusk, the lights would return, sometimes dozens at a time. They'd hang above the blackened sand for hours, until the sky turned red again with sunrise. Geiger counters spiked wildly near them, but the readings never matched the radiation levels of the surrounding ground. Something about the glow wasn't nuclear, it was alive in a way no one could define. Weeks later, a group of engineers set up cameras to record the next detonation. But when the film came back from the lab, the technicians found frames where the lights had formed shapes, vague silhouettes, human-like, with arms raised toward the sky. The footage was quietly classified, locked away. The engineers never spoke about it again. Some of the soldiers started calling them the Watchers. Others refused to sleep anywhere near the craters. One man went missing after wandering out to find where the light was coming from. They searched for 2 days. They found his rifle, still warm from his hands, but no trace of him in the miles of empty desert. Rumors began to spread through the base. The lights were following people home. Cars would stall on the road out of camp, and when the headlights died, something luminous would drift past the windshield slow, almost tender. One night, a guard claimed he saw a light hovering over a truck bed, tracing shapes in the dust. It vanished when he raised his weapon. The military tried to control the story. Officers told the men to keep quiet, to stop imagining things. "It's plasma," they said. "It's science." But even the officers began to avoid night patrols. There were too many reports, too many glowing forms over too many camps. Then came the first test with live troops in trenches operation. Desert sun. The soldiers were ordered to crouch low, cover their eyes, and wait for the flash. When the bomb went off, the desert turned to day once again. But one man, against orders, lifted his head for just a second. He said he saw something moving inside the light-like shadows, twisting within the explosion itself. 2 weeks later, that same man was found sitting on the ground at dawn, eyes wide open, whispering, "They were in the fire." He never spoke again. From then on, no one dared look too long at the afterglow. Some said the lights weren't from the blast at all. They came after, drawn to it, feeding on it. Whatever they were, they seemed to appear where radiation lingered. Longest, where human lives had burned brightest. One evening, as the sky bled orange over the test range, a pair of guards saw a cluster of orbs rise from the ground. They floated together, pulsing faintly, drifting upward like lanterns. But just as the men reached for their radios, the lights broke apart, shooting off in opposite directions, faster than any aircraft could move. The sound that followed wasn't thunder. It was a low hum, deep enough to rattle the teeth in there. Skulls dot the next morning. The guards' Geiger counters were normal. No traces of radiation at all. As if the lights had taken it with them. In the following weeks, soldiers began to fall ill, not from burns or blasts, but from sleeplessness. They swore they could feel something watching them in the dark, hovering just beyond the floodlights. A few even claimed to see faces forming within the glow, faces of the men who hadn't come back from the last test. One report mentioned a light appearing inside the mess tent. It floated inches above the table, flickering faintly before vanishing. The room smelled faintly of ozone, and the food beneath it was ice cold to the touch. Soon after, the base commander ordered all night watches canceled and every diary confiscated. The lights, he said, were not to be discussed again. Yet, that order did little to stop the fear. Men began deserting. Some begged to be reassigned overseas. Others simply packed their things and disappeared into the desert, chasing what they swore were voices calling their names. Years later, one surviving soldier, old and trembling, gave an interview. He said he could still see them sometimes hovering above the horizon, where the air shimmered like water. "They never left," he whispered. "They're still out there, waiting for someone to remember them." He never finished the interview. The tape ends with static, and what sounds like a faint hum in the background. What no one realized then was that the same strange lights would soon begin appearing far beyond Nevada across oceans, above test sites the world had sworn didn't exist. And this time, they wouldn't just watch. They would follow. The men who glowed in the dark, and nightmares began first. Men who had stared at the nuclear dawn now woke drenched in sweat, swearing they saw the lights hovering over their beds. Some said the glow seeped through the walls. Others said it came from within them. Corporal James Dwyer was one of the first to notice something strange on his own skin. In the dark, his hands faintly shimmered. At first, he thought it was just dust from the blast sites, but when he rubbed at the glow, it wouldn't come off. It pulsed soft and cold, like the light from beneath deep water. The medics told him it was phosphorescent residue, harmless and temporary. But when he turned out the tent lights that night, The glow spread across his arms like veins of faint blue fire. He wrapped himself in blankets, shaking until morning. By the end of that week, 3 more soldiers showed similar symptoms. All had been stationed closest to ground zero. Their pupils became oddly reflective, catching even the faintest light like animal eyes. The doctors stopped using mirrors in the infirmary after one of them screamed, claiming he saw someone else's face staring back from the reflection. Meanwhile, the ghostly lights returned, brighter this time, larger and closer. They began to appear over barracks and along the barbed wire fences, floating like sentinels. Some soldiers refused to look at them directly, fearing they might somehow get inside. Radios crackled to life whenever the lights drew near, whispering static that sometimes formed words, half phrases, a name, or a breath that wasn't quite human. The scientists from Los Alamos arrived soon after. They came in unmarked jeeps, their badges stripped of rank. They carried instruments no one recognized, humming machines that tracked electromagnetic fields rather than radiation. They spoke in low voices, their faces pale under the desert sun. One evening, as the men gathered for a briefing, the lead scientist, Dr. Reinhardt, addressed them without smiling. He said the lights were a natural atmospheric reaction, a form of energy discharge caused by the bomb's detonation. Harmless, he insisted, just light. But as he spoke, something flickered behind him, outside the canvas wall. A brief flash of pale blue, like a match struck in the air. Everyone froze. Reinhardt turned, but there was nothing. When he looked back, his voice trembled slightly before he continued. That night, the soldiers were ordered to stay indoors. Guards were doubled. But around midnight, a soft humming began, a low vibration that made the canvas ripple. The lights had returned, drifting between tents, brushing against the ground like silent will-o'-the-wisps. One floated close to the mess hall door, and the metal latch began to glow red-hot. Inside, men huddled together, listening as the hum grew louder, closer, until it felt like it was inside their chests. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The next morning, the sand outside was fused into glass. When they reviewed the security footage, they found that the film had turned black halfway through the night, every frame burned as if overexposed by something brighter than daylight. The generator had shut off at exactly the same moment. Soon after, the sickness began to spread. Men who had been exposed to the lights complained of hearing faint whispers in empty rooms. Some felt an unseen pressure on their chests at night, as if something were leaning over them. Dwyer wrote in his final letter home that the lights weren't just outside anymore, they were inside the blood. His letter was never delivered. The military classified the growing panic as a psychological contagion. They sent psychologists to calm the men, labeling the glowing skin and hallucinations as stress responses. Yet, when one of those psychologists vanished during a midnight walk, his notepad was found half buried in sand, its last line smeared in graphite. They are aware. A month later, the entire unit was transferred out under secrecy. The camp was dismantled. But before leaving, Reinhardt's team conducted one final test. They released weather balloons coated with reflective material into the night sky, hoping to capture light readings. As the balloons ascended, the soldiers watched in silence. Then, one by one, each balloon began to drift in unnatural patterns, jerking, twisting, forming a slow circle above the crater. The sensors went wild. A blue sphere appeared within the ring, expanding slowly until it filled the space like a living storm cloud. For a moment, it pulsed with rhythm, steady, deliberate, before vanishing completely. Leaving the instruments dead, the scientists packed up their equipment the next morning. Reinhardt gave no explanation. But before leaving, he ordered the entire area sealed, every trace of the experiment buried under layers of sand and silence. Decades later, when fragments of the report were declassified, one section had been left untouched. It described the strange readings from that final night, electromagnetic frequencies consistent not with lightning, but with biological signals. The report ended mid-sentence, as if someone had stopped typing in the middle of a thought. Those who remained from the original unit carried their secret into civilian life. Some drank until their hands stopped shaking. Others simply disappeared. Yet years later, scattered reports began to surface. Farmers in rural New Mexico, fishermen along the coast of Japan, each describing the same floating lights hovering after storms, moving with a silent intent. And sometimes, those who saw them glowed faintly for days afterward. No one connected these sightings at first. Not until one of the old soldiers was found dead in his home, his room faintly illuminated, though every lamp was off. His skin shimmered softly, as if the desert light had finally come to claim him. In the corner of his room was a box of letters he had written, but never sent. The last page bore only 3 words, scrawled shakily across the bottom. They followed us. Outside his window, neighbors reported seeing strange blue lights drifting over the field that night, vanishing just before dawn. And in a forgotten archive beneath Los Alamos, a technician scanning old film reels discovered something that shouldn't have been there: frames of moving light that formed almost human shapes, marching across the scorched desert. Their outlines flickered, but their faces, if you could call them that, were unmistakably those of the men who had once stood beneath the mushroom clouds. It was as if the soldiers had never truly left. When science met the unknown, Reinhardt didn't sleep much after the desert experiment. His wife later said he would wake up at 3 in the morning and just stand by the window, staring at the night sky as if waiting for something to return. He told her the glow wasn't gone. It had simply learned to hide in plain sight. By 1954, rumors from test sites across the world began surfacing patterns eerily similar to what the Nevada soldiers had seen. In the Pacific, near Bikini Atoll, Navy crews reported spheres of light that hovered over the water days after detonations. Cameras captured only faint traces, blurred shapes that seemed to dissolve whenever studied closely. Scientists blamed lens artifacts, but the sailors told a different story. The lights followed them, even miles from the test zone. Reinhardt was quietly reassigned to a new facility under the Atomic Energy Commission. There, surrounded by physicists and engineers sworn to secrecy, he studied the electromagnetic data recorded during those tests. The readings didn't behave like radiation, or heat, or lightning. They pulsed. Each light emitted a rhythm, a pattern that repeated with mathematical precision. It wasn't random. It was structured. When Reinhardt proposed the idea that the lights might be some form of plasma intelligence energy made aware by the massive atomic reactions, he was told to destroy his notes. Instead, he made copies and sent them to trusted colleagues overseas. Weeks later, 2 of those colleagues died in unrelated accidents. A third vanished entirely. Meanwhile, the soldiers from Nevada, those few who still lived, began to gather for reunions. Their bodies had aged faster than normal. Many suffered from strange nerve conditions, vivid hallucinations, and dreams that all shared the same detail: a pale light hovering just beyond reach, calling them back to the desert. One veteran described standing in his backyard one night and seeing a glowing figure at the tree line, shaped like a man but flickering like mist. When he approached, the air grew colder and the figure dissolved into nothing but static. The government dismissed all accounts as post-traumatic stress. Yet Reinhardt noticed something in the medical reports. Each soldier's heart rate displayed faint fluctuations matching the electromagnetic rhythm recorded in the lights, as if part of the phenomenon had imprinted itself inside them. The first real test came when Reinhardt was granted access to an underground chamber in New Mexico. sealed environment for controlled radiation research. There, he recreated conditions similar to a low-yield atomic blast using magnetic confinement. As the machines hummed, a shimmer appeared in the air, a wavering distortion, no larger than a fist. Reinhardt stood frozen as it brightened, expanding. Into a perfect sphere of blue-white light dot, it hovered above the floor for 3 full seconds, then fractured into tiny sparks that vanished without a sound. Every instrument failed simultaneously. Power dropped across the entire facility. The recording equipment captured one thing, a low-frequency hum followed by a voice-like vibration. 3 distinct tones repeating in intervals. No language, no words, just intent. When Reinhardt showed the evidence to his superiors, they confiscated the tapes and shut the experiment down. He was warned never to speak of it again. But that night, as he left the facility, he saw a faint glow reflected in his car window. 3 orbs hovering silently above the desert road, matching the rhythm of the sound. He didn't drive home. He drove into the desert, chasing the lights. Until dawn. When the sun rose, they were gone. But burned into the sand were 3 perfect circles of fused glass. Months passed. Reinhardt's health began to fail, his skin pale, eyes sensitive to light. He claimed the lights followed him everywhere. His journal entries became increasingly fragmented, filled with numbers, coordinates, and strange sketches of figures, made entirely of light. One entry, written just days before his disappearance, read, "They are not ghosts. They are memory, trapped in radiation, repeating what was once alive." Around the same time, in remote Siberia, Soviet scientists reported similar anomalies near their test sites. Entire sky fields illuminated with pulsating orbs that drifted silently for hours before fading. The USSR dismissed it publicly as polar atmospheric effects, but Reinhardt's contacts confirmed that some researchers there privately believed the phenomenon behaved like consciousness, a remnant or echo of human energy released at the Tifo moment of the explosion. In 1957, Reinhardt's car was found abandoned near the Nevada test range, engines still running. Inside, his briefcase was open, papers scattered across the seat. The last page of his notes contained only a single equation, a wave frequency identical to that of a human heartbeat. Witnesses later reported strange lights in the sky that night, rising and falling in rhythmic patterns, like breathing. For decades, his story remained buried under classified layers of Cold War secrecy. But fragments resurfaced through whispers and leaked documents, references to Project Spectre, an unacknowledged study meant to identify and harness the unknown energy emitted by atomic detonations. The files suggested that instead of trying to dispel the lights, scientists had begun trying to summon them. What they discovered was never officially published. Yet one surviving technician who worked on the project told a journalist years later that the lights responded when exposed to certain frequencies, almost as if aware of observation. "It wasn't random," he said quietly. "It was communication." The journalist never found him again after that interview. The story faded until the late 1980s, when footage leaked from Chernobyl showed something strange, bright orbs hovering over the reactor just hours before the meltdown. Witnesses described them as calm and silent, drifting against the wind. The resemblance to the Nevada lights was undeniable. Were they warning us, or watching what we had become? Even now, decades later, modern physicists dismiss Reinhardt's theories. Yet satellite data from declassified military sensors still record unexplained energy bursts over old nuclear sites. Some occur at the exact anniversaries of the detonations, and in one of those files, recovered from an obsolete data reel marked Test Range 12, a faint transmission repeats endlessly through static 3 tones, spaced evenly apart. Some researchers say it's nothing more than interference, But when the recording is slowed down and filtered, the hum forms a pattern, a pulse identical to a human heartbeat, followed by what sounds eerily like breathing. And then, silence. That silence hasn't ended. It waits just beyond the reach of our understanding, in the skies we once burned with fire. The files that vanished, the letter, arrived without a return address. A single envelope, yellowed with age, slipped through the mail slot of a retired archivist's small Nevada home. Inside, there was no note, only a strip of decayed film, brittle and faintly scorched along its edges. When he held it to the light, he saw movement. Faint, grainy, but unmistakable. Soldiers in radiation suits, and behind them, hovering in the smoke, 3 luminous orbs shifting like slow lightning caught in a jar. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, the archivist called an old friend, a journalist, who'd once covered classified testing programs. Within days, they met at a small motel off Highway 95. Together, they threaded the film through a projector, expecting a hoax. But when the machine whirred to life, the room filled with a pale blue glow that flickered against the walls. It wasn't just light on the film, it was light in the room, bleeding through the projection beam, as if something inside the image was alive. When the reel stopped, the air smelled faintly of ozone. 2 days later, the archivist vanished. His house was found empty, drawers overturned, phone lines cut. The only thing left on his desk was a note scrawled in uneven handwriting. "They're not from above. They're what's left behind." The journalist tried to investigate, but every lead led nowhere. Records of the Nevada test range between 1952 and 1957 had been sealed permanently. Even the project names had been erased from federal archives. He eventually stumbled upon a document in a forgotten university microfilm collection labeled Spectral Anomalies, Atmospheric Reflections. Most of the text was redacted, but between the black bars, a single paragraph remained readable. Observations indicate persistent luminous phenomena above detonation zones lasting between 14 and 72 hours post-blast. Movement patterns suggest non-random drift. Hypothesis: residual energy manifests in organized formation, potential sentience, unconfirmed. Beneath it, a handwritten note in the margin read simply, "They watched the places where men tried to become gods." That line haunted him. Months later, the journalist traveled to what remained of the Nevada test site. The land was fenced, guarded, lifeless. Yet at night, locals still whispered of lights that flickered on the horizon, soft, bluish, moving slowly against the wind. He camped nearby, camera ready, waiting. The desert was silent, except for the occasional gust of dry wind scraping over stone. Around 2 a.m., a faint pulse illuminated the horizon, steady, rhythmic. He lifted his camera. The glow grew stronger, splitting into multiple orbs drifting in a wide arc above the crater field. He zoomed in. Through the lens, he swore he saw faint shapes inside the lights, like silhouettes, human outlines, fragmented and blurred. His hands shook. He lowered the camera, blinked hard, and the lights were gone. The next day, his footage showed nothing but darkness. Yet his skin carried a faint static charge that made his fingers buzz for hours. Desperate for answers, he contacted a retired technician once stationed at Los Alamos. The man agreed to meet in a diner off Route 66, his hands trembling as he stirred his coffee. He said the project Reinhardt led didn't end. It changed names, moved deeper underground. They weren't trying to explain the lights anymore, he said. They were trying to replicate them. When asked what that meant, the technician leaned closer. "We built devices to mimic atomic energy bursts, small ones, controlled. The lights came every time. Not random. They came when called." He paused, eyes darting to the window. "But we stopped. Because once, they didn't leave." He never elaborated. The next morning, his motel room door was open, the bed still warm. His car was found idling in the parking lot, headlights on, driver's door wide open. The journalist returned home and began writing everything he'd learned. Within weeks, he noticed strange interference on his phone's soft humming, faint static like the sound from old film reels. His electricity flickered every night at the same hour. One evening, when the lights cut out entirely, he stepped outside and froze. Above his house, drifting silently against the starless sky, were 3 faint blue orbs. They hovered for only a moment before fading into the dark. When he went back inside, his laptop was on. A file he hadn't opened glowed on the screen. Its name, Spectre_1957. Inside were hundreds of scanned documents, photographs, and audio files. They described secret field studies conducted for decades after the test scientists measuring not radiation, but residual cognitive echoes. According to their reports, certain areas near old blast zones emitted weak electromagnetic pulses synchronized with human brainwave frequencies. In those zones, recordings captured whispers and shapes that mimicked lost soldiers' voices. Replaying moments from their last day's dot, it was as if the atomic blasts had imprinted consciousness onto the very air. One photo showed 3 figures standing at the edge of a crater, luminous and translucent, watching the cameraman. Beneath it, a caption read, "Subject forms retain pattern of original personnel, approximate." The journalist printed everything, stored copies in multiple locations. But before he could publish, a fire consumed his apartment. The report said faulty wiring. The neighbors said the lights had flickered moments before the flames. The files resurfaced years later through an anonymous leak. Yet even today, no agency claims responsibility, and no one can trace where the information came from. But one detail remained unaltered across every version of the document, an attached note, attributed to Reinhardt himself. It read, "They are not ghosts, and they are not divine. They are echoes made of energy records trapped in the fabric of radiation. Each light remembers a man who once stood beneath the blast. They drift because they cannot rest. We made them when we split the atom, and now they walk in its glow." For a long time, scientists ignored it as metaphor, but in the years that followed, similar anomalies appeared at decommissioned nuclear facilities across the world. Chernobyl, Semipalatinsk, Maralinga. Always the same rhythm, always the same pulse dot, and in one recently declassified satellite image of the Nevada desert, taken only months ago, faint circular scorch marks appear where no modern tests have been conducted. 3 perfect rings. Exactly like the ones Reinhardt found the night he disappeared, the lights are still there, hidden in the silence of the desert, waiting for the next voice to call them awake. The ghosts above Ground Zero, the desert hadn't changed much in 70 years. The wind still whispered across the dunes, carrying the same dry scent of salt and ash. Only now, the tourists who came to the old test range stood behind fences, smiling for photos beside warning signs that read, "Caution, radioactive material." They had no idea what was still buried. Beneath that sand, no idea what still shivered. There when the night grew silent. When the storms came, the sky over Nevada flickered strangely, like lightning trapped in glass. Scientists said it was static discharge, the leftover heartbeat of the Earth itself. But to those who'd lived long enough to remember the old tests, the light looked familiar. It pulsed slow, deliberate, almost like it was breathing. Among them was Henry Cole, one of the last living soldiers from Operation Desert Sun. His hands trembled now, spotted and frail, but his memory was sharp, too sharp. Every night he saw the glow again, felt the burn of that impossible dawn. His doctors told him it was trauma, but he knew better. The light wasn't memory. It was calling. Henry received a letter one winter morning, postmarked from a research institute he'd never heard of. It contained a single sentence typed in courier font. "We found what you saw." He shouldn't have gone. But curiosity, the kind that once made men look at bombs, burned too deeply to resist. The institute was hidden deep in the desert, built over a forgotten bunker once used for radiation analysis. The air inside smelled of rust and ozone. In the center of the main chamber stood a glass dome filled with pale mist, and within it something glowed faintly. Suspended in midair, like liquid light frozen in motion, a scientist named Dr. Harlow greeted him. A woman with dark eyes and the quiet intensity of someone who had seen too much. "We've been tracking them for years," she said softly. "They never left this place. They're drawn to the radiation, but that isn't what sustains them. It's memory." She showed Henry a recording footage from drones scanning the crater fields. The cameras picked up faint silhouettes moving within the light, echoing the posture of soldiers, their forms shifting in and out of focus like static ghosts. Some appeared to walk the same routes over and over, as if trapped in a loop. Others simply stood still, gazing upward as if waiting for orders that would never come. Henry's breath caught. He recognized the landscape, the crater, the fence, even the ridgeline where he once stood. "That's the day we tested Bravo," he whispered. "That's where Ellis disappeared." Dr. Harlow nodded. "We found readings consistent with human neural frequencies embedded in the electromagnetic field. It's as if the atomic reaction captured fragments of consciousness impressions of people caught in that moment." She paused. "The lights aren't haunting the skies. They are the skies burned into it like film." Henry stared into the dome. The light pulsed faintly, slow and rhythmic. For a moment, he thought he saw a face form within its eyes, a mouth, the faint shape of a man smiling. Then it vanished. "They respond to emotion," Harlow said quietly. "When we bring veterans like you here, the readings increase. It's as if they recognize something in you." He wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The light began to change color, deepening from blue to soft white, then to gold. The hum in the air grew louder, vibrating through the floor. Instruments on nearby tables flickered wildly. Harlow backed away, but Henry stepped closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. The glow expanded, filling the dome until the walls shone like a second sunrise. Then, faintly, he heard a voice whispering through the hum. Not words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was Ellis. Henry fell to his knees. The light pulsed harder, and suddenly the power in the entire facility failed. The dome cracked, shards falling around them as the air filled with the scent of metal and heat. When emergency lights flickered back on, the chamber was empty. The light was gone. Hours later, the backup recordings were reviewed. The footage showed Henry standing before the dome, bathed in golden light. For a few seconds, two silhouettes appeared beside him, both faint, one with a familiar outline, the other smaller, unrecognizable. Then the image flared white, and Henry vanished from the frame. Dr. Harlow resigned a week later. Before she left, she sealed the research logs and wrote a final entry. Energy cannot be destroyed. It remembers. It evolves. Months passed. The institute closed quietly, absorbed into another government division. The desert was left alone again, empty except for the wind and the warning signs. But one night, a satellite passing overhead captured something strange: 3 radiant orbs, hovering above the same coordinates where the bunker once stood. Each light moved slowly, then stopped in perfect alignment, forming a triangle that pulsed in rhythmic harmony. The pattern repeated exactly 3 times before fading into the clouds. No one officially explained it. The footage was classified, yet those who saw it claimed that within the glow, faint human forms seemed to stand, facing east toward the first light of morning. And somewhere in that same desert, near the rusted gates of the old test range, a traveler reported seeing a man walking alone across the sand. He wore no protection, no gear, just a faded military coat. When the headlights caught his face, it shimmered faintly, as if made of light instead of flesh. The man raised his hand, pointed toward the sky, and then vanished into the storm god. The traveler swore he saw other shapes following, dozens of them, silent, drifting like mirages. And above them, the night glowed faintly with that same blue light that never really left. Some say they're the ghosts of the soldiers who watched the birth of the atomic age. Others believe they're something else entirely, the living echoes of humanity's own creation, fragments of thought caught in the blast, forever repeating their final moment. But maybe, just maybe, the light that haunts the desert isn't haunting us at all. Maybe it's waiting for us to understand what we unleashed. And until we do, it will never stop watching.